We just ended the David Schultz stream, but we're going to continue on. We're going to do a Jimmy Snuka stream. I had the most people in my lobby that I've had for a TEW stream, so hopefully they will circle right back around and join us for some more Dark Side of the Ring, Dark Side of TEW, Dark Side of Jimmy Snuka specifically this time around. We've got Jimmy Snuka going up against David Schultz um, in a match tonight. Snuka's going to lose this match. And as we go through, and see all the things that Snuka's up to and learn more about the Snuka situation, I was a fan of Snuka for a long time, so we'll learn more, but we'll know kind of what happens. And I'm probably, quite honestly, I hired him in for the Dark Side of the Ring special, and we're not booking him to be anything crazy good. I definitely booked him better than Hillbilly Jim and them because he can go for 15 minutes. But yeah, I don't see him being like somebody who's a lasting figure. If anything, I'm working towards Scott Steiner. When I turn Scott heel and make him a single, he's going to crush him, and that should be near the end of Jimmy Snuka. But that is not to say he doesn't have a run ahead of him. For a few videos here, we'll be booking him. And yeah, let's see more about the Superfly.
Man, there was only one Superfly. A wild man with the hair and the zebra trunks
The
and his
Wild
body.
Man.
He was a
Right.
brilliant performer.
The gimmick he
He
has.
had freakish athletic talent.
Going up on the top rope, flying off and crashing into your opponent. I mean, that's awesome.
By 1983, Jimmy Superfly Snuka takes the wrestling world by storm.
Everywhere was a sellout. All the arenas, they were always packed. Look around and see, this guy's going to make you money.
But fans are unaware of the events surrounding the violent death of his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, which raises disturbing questions about who Jimmy really is.
Nancy was extremely into the relationship. She was invested 100%. She probably felt betrayed because this was the guy she was in love with that was killing her.
I really don't know what really happened that night. I mean, rumors just started to spread like fire. Jimmy did that. Jimmy beat her up.
She died of brain injury.
He didn't get arrested, wasn't detained.
We don't think we really received justice from the authorities. They did nothing, keeping the case open, but hoping that it would just go away.
30 years later, the case resurfaces with shocking new information to challenge the legacy and innocence of one of wrestling's greatest performers.
Part of our goal was to figure out who she was. This isn't just Jimmy Snuka's story, this is Nancy Argentino's story.
Let's find out what happened. Was it really an accident? Was it his intention to kill her?
By the early 1980s, the World Wrestling Federation explodes in popularity. A key ingredient to its massive growth has been in capitalizing on the star power of its most charismatic performers. But the man fans love more than anyone is the Superfly, Jimmy Snuka. From the moment he joins the WWF, audiences are entranced with his high-flying acrobatics and wild man persona. He is the embodiment of a real-life Tarzan. His universal popularity led many to believe his star would shine forever, but they were wrong.
From the Isle of Tonga, weighing 225 pounds, the Tonga Kid.
My name is Tonga Kid. Real name is Sam Fatu. To be honest, I wasn't interested in wrestling. I was this kid that was growing up in San Francisco, got into a lot of trouble. I did 6 months in juvie for hitting a bus driver. So, I thought, oh shit, I'm really gonna get my ass whooped now from my parents, right? And my mom's brothers are Alpha and Sika. So they sent me to Alpha and Sika, and they said, all right, this is what we need to do with you. You're gonna become a professional wrestler. I was 16 years old. You're talking a young kid that just started in the wrestling world. got thrown out there to the wolves. Somebody has to protect me. And that was the Superfly, Jimmy Snuka.
From the Fiji Islands, Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Jimmy Snuka was a professional wrestler from the island of Fiji. He could do it all. Could have been Hulk Hogan. Could have just, kept his head on, kept cool. Don Morocco, Sunset Beach, Hawaii. Started wrestling in 1970 and unofficially retired about 1988. Jimmy, he spent a lot of time in Hawaii. He grew up almost homeless. Where he slept, I have no idea, He had basically no home. I think that's why he latched on to professional wrestling, because it gave him a place, it gave him an identity, it gave him a family. Being accepted by crowd, being accepted by people, and being a hero, being somebody, meant the world to him.
Every time Jimmy went in the ring, he kneeled down, and people don't know why he do that. It's almost like people, he kneel down when you pray, right? Jimmy kneels down, and he does it to respect his fans. That's why Jimmy did it.
In the early 1980s, Snuka enters the World Wrestling Federation. Owner Vince McMahon recognizes his star power potential and soon makes Snuka his #1 attraction.
Snuka was the most popular performer in WWE at that time. Bob Backlund was the champion. They had some other stars, but Snuka was on fire. I'm Irv Muchnick. I'm the nephew of Sam Muchnick, who was the legendary National Wrestling Alliance promoter. I would say
cutter.
35
Boom,
years I've
Dr.
been
D.
obsessed with the pro wrestling phenomenon.
Snuka actually put a better performance on than
Snuka.
David, though.
They brought him in originally, he was a heel. They quickly figured out that they had to convert him into a babyface because he was just too popular. And Buddy Rogers became his manager, and
Jim Ross
did the
didn't do well
switch.
without a script.
We feel that we've got what it takes to win.
It all came
He's like,
together.
whoa, I didn't
in New
expect you to
York.
slap me.
He was
Oh,
money.
oh.
He was their biggest star. Snuka was at the peak of his drawing power.
Jimmy also fully embraces the grueling lifestyle of a wrestler on the road.
We go to clubs every night, we party every
Nice.
day. It's a lot, man. It was tough.
Go to the matches, go to
92.
sleep, work out.
Pretty good.
Repeat,
Pretty good show.
repeat.
Jolly good show.
Being on the road by
As
yourself
they
can
say.
be very damn boring sometimes, I think it's good to have somebody on the road to travel, with you on the road sometime, And Jimmy had his girlfriend on the road. I don't remember her name right off the bat.
Gonna
but,
sign Johnny
yeah.
Ace and Paul Diamond.
Yes. Yes, I'm talking about her, yeah.
My name is Lorraine Salome. I'm the older sister of the late Nancy Argentino. My younger sister and I always say that Nancy was the favorite because she never gave my mother a hard time. Nancy was a very intelligent girl. She had a lot of friends because people were
Boy
drawn to
Yamada,
her.
best
She
high
was a
flyer.
hard worker. She always had a job. And she took great pride in her clothes and her makeup and her hair. She always wanted to look good. Nancy was very innocent. Even though we lived in a big city, she lived a sheltered life.
That changes when Nancy is introduced to the world of professional wrestling at Madison Square Garden, the premier venue for the WWF.
Nancy had a childhood friend named Ellen that they grew up together. Ellen was engaged to a wrestler named Johnny Rodz. So Nancy got into the habit of going with Ellen to go to Madison Square Garden to see the wrestling matches. Afterwards, she'd go backstage and they'd wait for Johnny, and then she met Superfly Snuka. She really liked him, and it seemed to be a somewhat serious relationship right away. At the beginning, we were all like,
We got
oh, yeah, that's
Dusty,
great. Nancy's
Lex,
happy.
Ron
and
Simmons,
we didn't
Vader,
really
and
understand
Tom Pritchard
him that
signing
much.
today.
He was really strange because we tried to make him feel comfortable, but he would sit
Ric
in the
Flair
corner
rival offer. Let's
and he
go.
wouldn't talk to anybody
Let's figure
except
this out.
occasionally to Nancy. So he isolated himself. She told my mother
None of
that
them.
she was in love with him,
None of them.
and she
He doesn't
took care of
consider
him when
any
they
of
were
them.
on the road because Buddy Rogers didn't really want to travel with him anymore, like drive him from place to place.
Buddy Rogers' role extended far beyond an in-ring manager for Jimmy. He would also become his handler and chaperone on the road.
He said Jimmy was a sweet guy, but he was hooked on cocaine and other junk, and he was totally uncontrollable. And it reached a point where Rogers told Vince McMahon he couldn't be in the car with Snuka anymore because he would snort cocaine brazenly while they were driving.
So they talked to my sister Nancy, and all of a sudden that was her job. She would map out the places, she'd drive the car, she'd make sure Snuka got to the matches on time. She was his girlfriend, but she also had a job to do. My mother liked him, even though he wasn't, like, super friendly. And I always got the feeling that my stepfather, Ralph, had his doubts about him.
Kevin, we got Arn,
As
we got
Jimmy and
Rick
Nancy's
Rude.
relationship grows, her
Got some
family
nice
begins to see
management
the cracks
managers.
hiding behind Jimmy's quiet facade.
It was not that many times that I met him. I'm Louise. I'm Nancy's sister. I grew up with her.
2 weeks.
We were close. The whole family was close. My parents were away on a weekend, and I came home, and they were there, and they had brought home Chinese food, and I sat down to eat with them, and I was just my bubbly self, just yakking and chatting, and saying, oh, how are you, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't like how I was acting, and he just looked over me, and he put his hand, like, up to my throat, and he said, I could. And then he gave me that wrestling face.
Jeez.
I backed up, and I
could.
said, wow. And I looked at my sister. I said, I don't want to eat. And I went upstairs. And then when she came upstairs, I got her in the bathroom, and I said, Nancy,
Actually, I don't know if I want to extend any of those deals yet.
and she was all apologetic. Like, she looked kind of like timid, not what I was used to seeing in her. And she said, oh, no, 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 no. He's just tired. He's been working hard. It's okay. He felt bad that he treated me that way. So he said, here, I want to give you something. And I looked, and in my hand were like cocaine. I think it was cocaine. And Nancy was upset. She just said, don't do that. Don't do that. She doesn't need that. And I think I gave it back to him. And I said, no, 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 keep it. And I just said goodbye to him. And I thought, wow, that's like a real change in her personality all of a sudden.
Despite her family's deep concern, 22-year-old Nancy Argentino is now constantly on the road with her boyfriend, wrestling superstar Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
I didn't have a relationship with her because Jimmy was very protective with that, especially when it comes around all these crazy shark wrestlers, you know what I mean? I don't think anybody had a relationship with her, you know, because they knew who Jimmy was, you know. They knew who she was with.
So did you ever meet Nancy?
I met her, yeah. She didn't seem to really like me.
81 is a high expectation.
Maybe it's because he and I were arch enemies, or maybe it's because she knew I was friends with his wife, Sharon.
At any point in time, did you know that he was married?
I think Nancy told me, and I said, what, are you crazy? I said, he's married. She said, well, he's not with his wife, he's separated.
Well, how could he be with anyone else if he was with Nancy? It never crossed her mind because they were always together.
Jimmy and his wife Sharon are still living together with their 4 children in North Carolina. Time on the road has allowed him to live 2 separate lives, but his secrets can't stay hidden forever.
My name's Kevin Ammerman. I'm a journalist. I work for the Morning Call. It's a newspaper in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So it's January 1983. Jimmy Snuka is at Howard Johnson in Salina, New York. He's there with Nancy Argentina. Apparently, other guests are calling the front desk saying, it sounds like a man is beating a woman.
I was in my apartment sleeping, and I got a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning from Nancy.
Good to know.
She was screaming into the phone, Lorraine, you have to help me. I have to get out of here. I said, what's wrong? She said, he's chasing me. And then the phone went dead.
So police respond. Police claim that Jimmy Snuka has Nancy Argentina by the hair, and he's dragging her across the wall and across the floor by her hair. So police attempt to intervene, and they're met with almost superhuman strength by Jimmy Snuka, and he starts resisting arrest. And manhandling the police. There were also police dogs who responded. While he's fighting the police, he's also apparently fighting the dogs as well.
I don't
It was
understand
unbelievable.
the excursion thing.
I didn't
He's
know
like
what to
stuck
do
on
because
excursion.
I didn't know where she went. So I waited, and finally, early in the morning, she called me back. I said, Nancy, what happened last night? And she just said, oh, nothing, just a big misunderstanding.
Arrested on charges of assault and harassment, Snuka is able to avoid jail time with help from Nancy.
Right here is a copy of Nancy's affidavit signed
what?
by her. I'm
Since
Adam
when?
Clark. I'm a
Expired in 2
journalist
months.
who wrote the 30-year anniversary story
He was
about Jimmy Snuka.
free agent a little bit ago.
Argentina.
But, okay.
One of the charges pending against Jimmy S. Snuka is that of assault in the 3rd degree. This charge is said to be as a result of an assault upon me by Jimmy Snuka. I wish to state that he never struck me or intentionally harmed me in any way on January 18th, 1983, nor at any other time in the past. You know,
Since
she
I'm bringing
really
in Flair,
was
let's see if I can
in
bring in
love with
Savage.
Jimmy Snuka.
Yeah.
So after Jimmy Snuka was charged, he ended
caught up in a
pleading
sex
guilty to a minor
scandal.
charge of harassment, and then donates $1,500 to a local
might-
Ronald McDonald house.
might wanna
And,
bring him in
You know, he
anyway.
basically walked away.
But not for
Then
that
she
price.
just went back on the road with him.
They were counting on Nancy at that point to get him places because nobody wanted to deal with him. He was unpredictable. He was high a lot. So they really put everything on my sister to make sure that he got to the next match.
Back on the WWF circuit, Jimmy and Nancy traveled from town to town across the Northeast.
So one of their regular stops was Egg Hall in Allentown.
Every 3 weeks, the WWF shot syndicated television in Allentown for their A show, which was called Championship Wrestling. The WWF was important to Allentown. It had an economic impact.
It wasn't uncommon to see Andre the Giant hanging out somewhere at a bar or see a big star hanging out at the George Washington Motor Lodge.
At that exact moment in May, I believe, of 1983, they were shooting some of the big angles in his feud with Don Morocco.
Oh, we had strap matches, chain matches, and cage matches. And it was looking good. Snowball was just starting to roll.
In the early hours of
Arn
May
Anderson.
10th, 1983, Jimmy and Nancy arrive in Allentown to tape an episode of Championship Wrestling.
Jimmy Snuka leaves the George Washington Motor Lodge and goes to film wrestling. He films a couple sessions, comes back to the motel, and then leaves again. Leaves in the afternoon, and he comes back about 9 p.m.
Jimmy heads to his room where Nancy has been all day. Just a few hours later, the motel's other occupants are awoken by a disturbance outside.
What woke me up was the sirens. My room was not far from Jimmy's room.
There was an ambulance that had been sitting outside of Snuka's room. So what's going on over there?
I can see the police cars in the ambulance and roped off in some yellow tape. And Snuka leaning up against the cop car. Jimmy looked pretty scared. It was bad. It was very bad.
On the night of May 10th, 1983, emergency responders arrive at the George Washington Motor Lodge in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where Jimmy Snuka and his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, have been staying with several other wrestlers.
Cocky youth for Johnny
It
Ace.
was between 11:30 and 11:45 that we had gotten called to an unconscious female. My name is Shirley Reeve, and I was a paramedic in 1983. We drove up to the scene, and the room door was open. Jimmy was standing there along with the detectives. She was in bed, covered up with a sheet, and examined her. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, and that's more indication of a head injury. And I'm like, well, she's in bed, like not on the floor, not outside. He was just touching the feet, and I had to basically drag things out of him. And he just said that they must have wrestled a little bit too much the night before when he pushed her over, and she had hit her head. So she came inside, they went to bed. He went to his wrestling match the next morning, came back. She was still conscious, but I guess was becoming a little bit lethargic or sleepy. So he just said, well, I'm gonna go to my match. I'll come back and check on you later on. So when he came back later on, then she wasn't responding. She was having difficulty breathing, and that's when he called the ambulance. I did do an intubation, put an airway in. We started a line, we gave her some drugs, and just took her in.
While Snuka's at the hospital and they're trying to revive Nancy, he's starting to tell person after person what happened. And at that point in time, when police interview all of these witnesses in the ER, they all say that Snuka mentioned some sort of conflict, either shoving, striking, that somehow he physically pushed or struck Nancy, and she fell down and hit her head.
I was in my room, dead sleep. It was about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the phone rings. I pick it up, and they say, this is the Lehigh Valley Hospital. Can I speak to Caroline Argentino? So I get up, and I go in my mother's room, and I wake her up. I said, Ma, the hospital's on the phone, and she comes to my bed, and I hear her say, is she gonna be all right? And then I hear her say, dead? Dead? So Jimmy, he got on the phone, and as far as I can recall, he started like blubbering and saying that, oh, it was an accident. It was an accident. She fell and hit her head. She hung up the phone. She went and told my father, and then my sister Lorraine.
It was like we were all walking around like zombies because we were in shock. We just couldn't believe it. We never thought that it would end up like that.
And then we just called all the family members
Dusty
and all
the
of our
Dude.
friends. And I cried on the phone with them, and we were all in shock.
In the early morning hours, Snuka returns to the motor lodge and is questioned by police. He introduces yet another conflicting account of events.
The next morning, police come to the hotel to interview Jimmy Snuka, and they start asking him about what happened. And this is critical because at this point in time, Snuka has already told multiple people at the hospital that he had some involvement in her fall. He says that they stopped alongside the road when they were coming to Allentown. Nancy had to go to the bathroom. He says she gets out. There's a lot of trucks driving by, so he hollers at her, come on, hurry up. And as she's trying to come back, she slips. She hits her head on the side of the road. And that's what caused the injuries.
By now, the news of Nancy's death has made its way to WWF headquarters, and Snuka's boss,
Luger's
Vince
got a
McMahon.
broken neck.
I got
Oh
on
my
the phone
gosh.
and,
Why'd I hire a man with a
got
broken
hold of
neck?
Vince Jr. Vince says, have you heard anything about Snuka and his girlfriend? I said, as a matter of fact, here I am with Lieutenant so-and-so. And I put him on the phone to Vince.
McMahon informs police that Snuka will continue to cooperate with the investigation, and his star performer is released without charge.
At what point did you guys as a family start to feel like maybe this isn't an accident?
Well, Nancy's funeral was so disturbing. Traditional Italian funerals in those days, you were laid out for 3 days, and then you had a mass, and then you were buried. The second day, Buddy Rogers walks in with Snuka, and he's wearing flip-flops and these really, really short shorts and some kind of tank top.
Buddy Rogers was leading him around, pretty much. Then he went over to the coffin, and he started crying on the coffin and touching her, and my father had to pull him off the coffin.
I asked my mother, did he say anything to you? Did he say how sorry he was? And she said no. He said, she looks terrible. Now that was a pretty weird thing to say. You know, of course she looks terrible, she's dead. The undertaker came over to my stepfather, and he said, you know, I have to tell you, this is disturbing because we had a hard time getting her to look good because she had a huge bruise around her neck, and she had multiple cuts and abrasions all over her body. Then I think, you know, my stepfather knew that something was terribly wrong about the way she died.
Yeah, that sounds pretty wrong.
The tragic death of 23-year-old Nancy Argentino seems to have done little to slow the career of Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Look what I got next to me.
In the summer of 1983, and just a few weeks after her passing, Snuka is back, continuing his storyline with adversary Don Morocco.
When Snuka flies, Morocco dies.
So was there like a part of you that was thinking like something might happen to Jimmy?
Selfishly, I was worried, yeah. just out of my own selfish motivation.
You can't play a Texan.
You know, I didn't want to lose my golden goose because there's a lot of money down the road to be made.
Their feud culminates in a legendary cage match at Madison Square Garden, which becomes a career-defining moment for the Superfly.
People are lining up all over the country to see this match. We just set the place on fire. Holy hell. Jimmy was such a star, and people wanted to see him jump off the top cage on me and splash me.
I'll never forget that night because I was there when he came off of the cage. I mean, whew.
Superfly perched 15 feet high.
We need to use Taker somewhere.
Keeps just rock New York.
Jimmy, he tried things that people never tried before. He was a high flyer. He probably spent more time off the mat than on the mat. I'm Carol Snuka. I was married to Jimmy Snuka. I was with Jimmy for 20-some years. Sometimes, every now and then, somebody would make a comment and said something about, I know what you did, Jimmy, I'm going to be waiting for you.
Fans congregating outside the stage exit, and Snuka comes out, and there's a woman who yells to Snuka, hey, Snuka, you goddamn fucking murderer, when are you going to kill another girl?
He's always said to me, I know what I did. Let the other people think what they want, okay? If they want to think I did that, that's them. That's in their mind. That's not my mind. I know what I did in my mind, and my God knows, and that's all I have to worry about. They want to talk, they want to do that, that's fine. Doesn't bother me.
While Snuka's career in the WWF is reaching new heights, authorities in Allentown continue their investigation.
The challenge that they faced in trying to prosecute this case was they had a dead body, they had a woman who clearly had injuries, but they had no other witnesses, they had no confession.
The fact that somebody just tells different stories is certainly not enough evidence to charge anybody with a crime. My name is Frederick Conjure. I was the police chief in Whitehall Township, Pennsylvania in 1983. The lieutenant in charge of the investigation, I've never had any reason to doubt that he wouldn't do the best he could to investigate the case, and I think he did.
Although they didn't drive Snuka around to try to find the place where Nancy had supposedly fallen, they did go to the trouble of sending 2 Whitehall officers 100 miles from Allentown to the family house in Flatbush, Brooklyn.
Detective Procanon sat in my living room, sitting there saying, you know, we're sorry, but we're gonna rule this as an accident, that she fell by the side of the road. At that time also, Snuka's promoter kept calling the house. My mother got on the phone, and I heard him say to her, Mrs. Argentino, I'm so sorry for your loss. Do you think like $25,000 would help you? At that time, my mother knew what was going on. She said,
all right. So we join in as we're booking Jimmy Snuka during a little bit of a tumultuous time, you know. But yeah, we are here going up against Arn Anderson. Arn Anderson's going to make his debut on Saturday Night Fever, and he's going to come up against Jimmy Snuka today. And we'll see who's, you know, going to come out on top. Is going to be Arn Anderson. We're just going to do a regular match. Snuka can't do anything past 10 minutes unless we go, you know, unless we're doing Wild Brawl or something like that. So we'll just stick with a regular 15-minute match. We'll get Arn out there as the enforcer. Yeah, despite some of the heelish behavior we see going on over here, Snuka is being booked as the babyface, the wild man gimmick. So we're gonna have, you know, Arn kind of work technical, work snug, work you know, a real grind him into the mat, chain wrestling kind of match where he kind of, you know, he's the enforcer. He enforces his will on Jimmy Snuka and grounds him, tries to keep him away from the ropes. There's a few chances where he might get up on the top turnbuckle. The crowd goes crazy, but Arn's going to peel him down, and we're really going to make Arn look real good in this debut match. But yeah. Probably end it with a pinfall.
Think that my daughter's life is worth $25,000 and hung up.
Unable to bring criminal charges against Snuka, Nancy's family pursues him in a wrongful death lawsuit, arguing his behavior was negligent on the day she died.
He let her go to sleep, and he went off to his matches. He didn't come back for like 8 hours later, and by then, she was dead.
The Argentino family won a $500,000 default judgment against Snuka, who didn't show up. And his lawyers then did a filing with the court. Snuka hadn't paid them. The family never collected a dime of that $500,000 judgment.
Jimmy's family and Jimmy didn't do anything about it. They never went, they never showed up, they didn't do anything. I don't know who advised him on that, but I feel it was the wrong decision. I think it should have been handled right then and there.
My mother just gave up. She threw in the towel. You know, she had a very hard time dealing with it, very hard. We all were so disgusted with the whole thing. We just had to get on with our lives.
His drug problems got worse at that point, and then he became unreliable altogether, and WWF/WWE had no use for him. And I think the half-life of Jimmy Snuka's career and his decline owes to guilt over exactly what happened with Nancy Argentino is pure speculation, but it couldn't have helped. And so he did the descent of the wrestler and went to the AWA, went to finally the indie circuit, and finally, you know, the autograph shows.
On the indie circuit,
Anything
woo, woo.
except signing your name for people who remember you when.
As the years pass, Nancy's story is
Bam
nearly
Bam that doesn't
forgotten
have
by
the
everyone except
Dusty
her
was
family.
tired.
Then in 2011, interest in solving her mysterious death was suddenly renewed.
I was sitting in my apartment in 2014, and I get a call from Adam from the morning call, and he said, hi, we're doing an article about the 30-year cold case death of your sister, Nancy Argentino.
It clearly was a mystery there, and it seemed that there was a story that was really ripe for us to dive into and figure out, one, what the hell happened, and two, what can we bring to light that nobody's ever seen before and that nobody's talking about.
In 2013, I was working for the morning call. My editor was a big wrestling fan, and he just thought it would be something interesting to revisit on the 30th anniversary of it.
One of the first things I did in my reporting was try to find the autopsy report. So I called over to the Whitehall Township Police Department to try to get the files. I called the coroner's office. He said he wasn't allowed to turn it over because the case was still technically open. So really, it was up to us to go away to go get that document.
And then we came across the wrongful death lawsuit. Within that lawsuit, there was tons of information. That's where things really picked up.
Unlike the files from the criminal case, the documents contained within the family's lawsuit are unsealed. Surprisingly, it includes Nancy's never-before-released autopsy report.
This is the autopsy report that nobody had seen publicly until our story came out. It says, the pattern of her injuries is consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. It is not consistent with a single simple fall in view of the other injuries that she has, scalp, facial, and bodily bruises and abrasions. It says that the magnitude of the injuries may even be suggestive of maid abuse. The last sentence of this document is really the bombshell that came out of the autopsy report. And it says, I believe that the case should be investigated as a homicide until proven otherwise. And it's signed by Dr. Mahalikis.
Not Kendall Wyndham. Son of a...
30 years after Nancy Argentino's mysterious death, a newly discovered autopsy report suggesting a potential homicide raises questions about the 1983 police investigation.
Mahalikis says here, I personally checked the clothing that Miss Argentino was wearing at the time of her injury and found no evidence of dirt or tears in the fabric.
It's the first time I've seen that report, but I could tell you if I were a defense attorney, I'd say, well, of course he didn't have any dirt or anything because he took her back to the hotel room. She laid down in bed, then she was put in the ambulance.
Well, this was brought up in the case years and years later. I believe the case should be investigated as a homicide until proven otherwise.
And we're back to it was investigated as best as it could be investigated, I guess. So, you know, did everything that was conceivably possible.
So as I'm working on this story, of course, Jimmy Snuka has no clue that there's a reporter in Allentown, Pennsylvania who's investigating this case. And while we're working on the story, his book comes out.
Published in December 2012, Snuka's autobiography marks the first time he publicly addresses the events in Allentown, as well as the meeting he had with McMahon and local authorities.
So these are the original police documents. It is the most complete record that anyone has ever seen. So this is the only record we have of that final meeting. Unlike all of the other interviews that were done in this case, there is no detailed transcript of what was said over an hour. And we do know that after that meeting, the case effectively went cold. The police interviews stopped. There was nothing else in that file.
Vince McMahon would have great reason to defend Jimmy Snuka. Let's say at the time he is charged with murder in 1983. That would be a terrible thing for the WWF.
Vince McMahon is a businessman, and no matter what business you're running, if one of your top employees is being investigated for murder, that's bad for business.
Jimmy talked to me a lot about Vince. He called him Brother Vinny. And Jimmy felt very close to Vince, and he trusted him 100%. He didn't read or write English. He didn't understand it. You know, with his contracts, with everything, he trusted the people. He actually said to me one time, people would come to him before a match, and he'd say, Vince said, sign this, or you won't get paid after the show. He would sign papers, and he had no idea what they said. And I've tried to find out what happened in that room back in '83, and nobody knows. Jimmy said to me, Vince came down with his briefcase and said to him, it's over, don't worry about it, it's done. He thought it was done.
There's no transcript of the meeting. It's the only interview there's no transcript of. And then seemingly the investigation stops there. And there's been a lot of speculation on what could have happened in that meeting.
I haven't a clue. I mean, I don't see that makes any difference. I would only say there wasn't anything significantly said or done, so that's why there's no record of it.
The meeting with McMahon and law enforcement isn't the only section of the book to stir
end the
controversy,
investigation,
but also the way he portrays his relationship with Nancy.
And obviously he covered the situation with Nancy in there as
Paul
well.
Diamond and Rock and Rebel, great chemistry tag team.
I had said to him,
excellent
sure
chemistry
you want to
as a
put that
tag
in there?
team.
And he said,
So we're gonna book them.
He said, that's
We're
my
gonna
book.
start putting them together.
It's my life. It's got to be in there.
And in there, he talks about, oh, yeah, Nancy was a nice girl, but Nancy ruined his life. And when we read that, we were like, Nancy ruined his life?
When I got to the part about my sister, I was furious. He kind of
Arn got
insinuated
the
she was a
great
once-in-a-while
gimmick of
girlfriend.
enforcer. So Jimmy
Oh,
got
and he
Arn over.
Denied that he ever hurt her. He never touched her.
For
Why
our
would he do
purposes,
that? So he totally
that's
denied
pretty good.
that
An 80,
he ever
actually.
laid a hand on her.
It's really good.
So the version that Jimmy Snuka tells in his book is very similar to what he told in 1983,
Dusty
but it's not
Rhodes got
exactly
a
the
poor
same.
gimmick.
And that was one issue over the
Arn
years.
isn't a
as he
good
talked about
road
this, his
agent.
radio interviews and other accounts. It was always just slightly different with some of the details.
So she got out and wanted to go use the bathroom, pulled over to the side.
Adrian and Destroyer
I
don't
guess
work as
after
a
she
team.
got done, she came back over like a stream that was there. She jumped and slipped and banged her head.
84. That's a good
For
match right there.
decades,
Got the crowd
Snuka has
buzzing.
maintained Nancy's injuries occurred en route to Allentown, with
Okay.
no mention of any other passengers. in the
92
car.
overall. Not bad.
I understand that
Not bad at all.
you were at the George Washington Hotel on May 10th.
Greg the Hammer Valentine,
Yes,
huh?
I was. I was there.
He
at the
signed to
George Washington
WWF.
Hotel in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Is this Ric Flair?
We drove to Allentown,
Barry
Pennsylvania.
Windham.
Me, Jimmy, and her. We jumped into the car and drove there.
Okay, so you and Jimmy and Nancy drove together to Allentown.
Yeah.
And what do you remember from that ride all over?
Oh, it was fun.
David
I was
Schultz
in
is
the
going to
back
hurt
seat.
someone
We had the
badly,
Elvis
says Kerry Von
going,
Erich.
and Jimmy had some nice, beautiful cologne on. He always loves cologne. It smells
They
good.
should be worried about
Just
Jimmy Snuka
talked and
hurting someone
chopped it
badly.
all up, you know, going to Allentown, Pennsylvania. Yep. As soon as we arrived there to Allentown, Jimmy and Nancy went their way, their room, and I went my way to my room, and that's when all that stuff took place. When Nancy got killed that night.
You recollect what kind of his story was that he had told about what had happened with Nancy?
I don't really know what Jimmy told the police.
Yeah, it was basically that they were driving, coming into Allentown, and she had to use the restroom. And so she walked outside the car, and she fell while she was using the bathroom outside the car.
Yeah,
You remember
Benoit,
that story at all?
Pegasus
No,
Kid,
no, I
making
don't
some
remember
waves out
that
there.
story.
Did you ever have any personal interactions with Snuka
In
yourself?
Japan.
Not that I recall that I actually. No,
Well, here's the thing. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because the
This is
person
my
that was just
developmental.
in this house before you
said he was in the car. No.
said he was in the car. So, and he's never told his story before. And so had you ever heard that there could have been a third person in the car?
When you ask me about that, you know, I somehow I had heard that, but I mean, if you pinned me down and said what day, time, who was this person, but there was never any contradiction to Snuka's story.
Yeah, we're talking 30 years ago.
35.
So I did talk to Sam Fatu, and I think that might be confused because he's never told me that. But, you know, the wrestlers, they're not lying. It's just they don't remember the whole thing.
We started doing better for a little bit.
After the autopsy report is uncovered, the Lehigh County Attorney's Office responds to intense public pressure and announces Nancy Argentino's death is being officially reinvestigated.
The main difference in how the District Attorney's Office handled the case in 1983 versus how the District Attorney's Office handled the case in 2013 was the District Attorney's Office in 2013 ultimately put it to the people. We are going to put this in front of a grand jury. Sure enough, the grand jury thinks there should be charges filed in this case. Jimmy Snuka should be charged with murder.
On September 1st, 2015, Jimmy Snuka is arrested and charged with third-degree murder. He's now 72 years old, and only a month earlier had announced he was suffering from stomach cancer.
There's a few articles that we saved over the years, this being one of them.
It's really happening. After all these years, better late than never.
When I started working on this, I never thought that just a couple years later, this story, my story, would become a headline everywhere. It was one of the biggest stars in the history of professional wrestling being arrested and being charged with murder because of a story in the local newspaper. That just doesn't happen, and it was surreal then, and it's still surreal now.
Jimmy's health during the trial was really bad. He didn't understand anything at that point. He had too much brain damage. Honestly, I think it was a blessing because when he went through the courts, he didn't know what it was about. And I think if he had known what it was about, it would have been devastating to him.
They had a series of hearings, and all of a sudden, Snuka's lawyer said, he has brain damage because he took so many blows to the head. So he is not capable of standing trial.
His attorney had argued that his dementia was so bad that he didn't even realize what was going on.
And the judge basically ruled that he was unfit to stand trial, and specifically, she felt that he was mentally unfit to stand trial.
For Nancy's family, seeing Snuka confronted with his past in a courtroom is the only justice they'll ever get.
Everybody was talking about it. They knew what he did. So we were happy that he got somewhat of punishment for Nancy's death, so.
It hurted me bad because I know what type of person he is. I can't see Jimmy hurting anyone. That's just what I believe.
The family, you know, was still felt dislighted. Somebody lost a daughter. There certainly, you know, have to be.
So for this final match on our Dark Side of Jimmy Snuka episode, we're going to look into Jimmy Snuka versus Mick Foley and see what we can do there. I think this has got to be a storytelling type match. There's a lot of history here, even not in the ring, you know, but just in general. You guys can't see that there's nothing, but there's nothing. You know, Jimmy Superfly Snuka was one of the people that Mick Foley looked up to as a kid when he was young. So I think there's definitely two ways you can play it. You know, if Foley was a babyface, we could play it that, oh, he looked up to this man as a kid. You should never meet your heroes. Real Jimmy Snuka is a terrible guy. Real Jimmy Snuka kills people. Real Jimmy Snuka abuses his wife. Maybe we wouldn't go that far with the angle, but I'm just saying, how when you grow up, expectation of what your hero's like can be completely separate than the reality of what your hero's like. But since Foley is a heel, I think he's jealous. I think we play up, Foley's a maniac, so he can go after anybody for any reason. He doesn't need a reason. But he goes after Jimmy Snuka because he's jealous of Snuka, because he wants to be as great as Jimmy Snuka. And even now, with an aging Jimmy Snuka, he comes in and has better opportunities than Mick Foley, has better booking than Mick Foley, has better, you know, more fans than Mick Foley. So Mick Foley's jealous, and he wants to hurt Jimmy Snuka. He wants to hurt his hero in front of these people that cheer him, and I think that's going to be an interesting match with Foley going over, evil triumphing over good, and that's what we will be portraying in this one. Although it's hard to call Jimmy Snuka good after what we've just heard about.
Saddened or hurt?
Dementia or not.
The one shame about this case is that there was no true final resolution. The event occurs in 1983. We go 30 years before charges are filed. Charges are filed. But then a judge rules that Jimmy Snuka is incompetent to stand trial. So he never gets to fully clear his name. The Argentinos never get to fully get a prosecution. There was no final resolution on the case, and that's why people continue to debate it.
10 days after the ruling on January 15th, 2017, Snuka succumbs to his cancer and dies.
It was devastating for me. It was sad. I was pretty depressed, You'd lost a good man, a good person, Until today, I'm still angry about it. I'm angry that the man passed, and I'm angry what people say about him, It's sad. All the way around, it was sad on both parties. I loved it, Jimmy, a lot.
There's no doubt that Jimmy Snuka was a great professional wrestler, one of the biggest stars of his time, a talented wrestler, well respected for his craft. But at the same time, you can't overlook his personal life. You can't overlook what happened with Nancy. You can't overlook the violence that's been brought up over the years. So it's a complicated legacy, and it's a legacy that will always be clouded by his personal life. There is no more separation of the ring and outside of the ring. What happens outside of the ring is just as influential these days as what happens in the ring.
Jimmy Superfly Snuka stands as one of the most iconic professional wrestlers in history. A daredevil acrobat, far ahead of his time. But his legacy will never escape the events in Allentown. For Nancy's family, her memory lives on, while justice remains out of reach.
Lorraine and I really want to share the story because we don't feel like we've gotten justice. We feel like Nancy just keeps calling out to us in some way or another to seek justice.
There's no closure for anybody, no closure. I've never met Nancy or anyone in her family. I feel really bad for them. They lost their daughter. Okay, something should have been done. I think letting it go for 32 years caused a lot of damage.
I think too often stories of domestic violence, and especially when they involve powerful men, center around the men, and the women are reduced to just the victim. And you don't know anything about them except this is the person who was attacked by someone. This is the person who was the victim.
As you can see, she was filled with life, and she had so much hope for her future. She was 19 here, and she died when she was 23. Her life was just cut down too briefly.
It's a great picture of her.
That's rough. That's rough. So, with that, I think it is time I don't have Dino Bravo. But it's time to run our show here. Just want to book a brief, quick little undercard match here. With Yamada going over, he really needs to start getting some good booking. We'll get him on the show next week probably, but yeah. Alright. They don't seem to click, so that doesn't work. But in any event, our beginning segment was pretty hot. Scott Steiner's got a nice hot catchphrase. Maybe that's Big Papa Pump. Performance of Scott Steiner was good. Paul Ellering helped both the Steiners. Sweet. Yeah, we got the Road Warriors manager with the Steiner brothers. The Road Warriors are off in WWF. Matt and Junk don't click. Okay. Good to know. Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton have excellent chemistry as tag team partners. We got a 74 out of them in the Wild Samoans. Sika had a 76. Nice, nice. Hoffa was the weak link. Alright, we had Mick Foley and Jimmy Snuka. Mick Foley, boom! Double arm DDT. Pins Snuka 1, 2, 3. Good heat, decent wrestling. Solid. Dusty Rhodes and Kevin Sullivan. A great promo with a superb match afterwards. Nice. Bionic Elbow pinfall. Alright, and our main event of the evening, the tag team bout between the Steiner brothers and the Raging Stampede, Owen Hart and Dynamite Kid. Ended up being an 88. Dynamite benefited from his hot new move. While the crowd was buzzing, Paul Ellering did some great work at ringside. Good stuff. And that is going to actually conclude Sunday, December 4th. So let's look at our year-end review here. Let's just see the end of the year, because it's always a good thing to check out, you know. It's always a fun time, you know, your end of the month, you get to see your finances, but at the end of the year, you really get to see that new Power 500. Who are our best workers? Who are the best workers in the entire world? Who won match of the year? Who's the most improved company of the year? I hope that's me, just saying. I think that would be my second time winning the honor, but we'll see. Wrestler of the year is Tenryu. Alright, Tenryu. All Japan, Company of the Year. No surprise there. Team of the Year is Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart. Ooh. And Bret's contract is up in 1 year and a couple of months. It's a little ways out. Wow, match of the year was actually Randy Savage versus Jake Roberts. Two people who, within the next 2 to 6 months, I plan on bringing in. Randy Savage is out due to a sex scandal. He's toxic. If you bring him into your workplace, it's just a bad idea. I guess he's canceled, essentially. Can't work with him. And Jake Roberts is a freelancer who's leaving WWE in 2 months. Former world champion of mine. The show of the year was an All Japan show. The Kings of Spandex. Young wrestler, Dr. Wagner Jr. Veteran wrestler, Harley Race. WWF exclusive. Female wrestler of the year. Most improved company of the year. Yeah, for the second time. That's 2 of them. Count them up, 2 of them. Independent wrestler of the year is a female wrestler. Unfortunately, we don't have a women's division. Roddy Piper is the manager of the year with an exclusive written contract for the next year and 2 months. Let's see. Color commentator is Jesse Ventura. Cool. How long's he got? A year and 2 months. A year and 2 months from now is going to be a good time, though, I tell you what. This also, due to my altering slightly of the database, is going to be when Stone Cold debuts. Mr. Steve Austin. I'm just seeing if there's anybody else that we might want to pick up. while we wait, but definitely we're going to pick up Steve Austin. Three years, he wants 6,000, and I'm willing to do that because that's fine. He already starts with 23s in all of the relevant areas here in the States. Taz, let's see, Terry Power, Thunderbolt, Tony and Val, huh? They seem like they'd be a good tag team, but we'll check it out later. Steve Austin, Scott Levy, Shane Ballard, Sean Mooney, Sean Morley, Nelson Knights in WWF. Mike Awesome debuted. So there's that. Yeah, I think that's just about everybody. John Browning. Oh, geez, I have regeneration off, but they're regenerating, folks. So, it is what it is. Yeah, here's another one. Although he's already at a 55 psychology, I might actually want to pick this kid up. 6 foot 237. Let me give you a handshake deal. Jeez. Dog's going crazy. Alright. I think that'll be it. Oh wait. Most important thing, we should have done this first. Let's sign Ric Flair. And that will do it. We'll call that a day. Signing Ric Flair and finishing second in the American battles for the area this month. WCW dropped out of negotiations. Oh boy. Okie dokie. Kevin Sullivan needs some time off. But other than that, we are all set. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and I'll see you next time for another Dark Side of the Ring TEW crossover. Peace out.